Welcome, Debbie, back to your familiar grounds. And you know this, you've done this a million times, but I would really like to thank you for saying yes and agreeing to help us record this, because this is something that I think FACCC spends a lot of time trying to help educate faculty about, and I think it will be very helpful to have have this recorded and be able to have this conversation so that we can help spread the message a little bit faster and wider. So welcome, thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Debbie Klein. Go for it.
Thanks so much, Wendy, and welcome everyone here. It's so great to see you, and thank you for coming out at the end of your workday in the middle of the week. We're so grateful you're here. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen with the slides, and then Wendy will drop the slides in the form of a PDF in the chat for your reference if you would like. So I'm going to go ahead and share. And here we are. So hopefully you can all see that. And the way we're telling the story today is by talking about kind of foregrounding educational philanthrocapitalists. And we will define what that is and how they are, and their big money are really a threat to our faculty, our students, and our democracy. And I would say that our system in particular is in an existential crisis. We have been probably for 2 decades, and I think we can start telling that story. And this is one way to contextualize and explain the story, which we've been trying to do for a few years now. So please stay till the end, and then we can have a conversation. That's so important to us. So I thought we would start with a definition of philanthrocapitalism. So this is the philanthropy practiced by corporations through foundations they create or support. And I found this definition I've been reading up on it, but there's an article called "Faith and Charity is Hopeless. Philanthrocapitalism has failed us." And I thought I would read the quote because I want to be very clear about what we're talking about. So the rapid growth of profits in the IT and finance sectors during the 1990s and 2000s brought forth the new gilded age of philanthropy with its own buzzword, philanthrocapitalism. These capitalists believed that business methods are better able to solve social problems than the methods used in the public sector. This new group includes people like Gates, Buffett, Bloomberg, Soros, Zuckerberg, the Koch brothers, and others, representing both conservative and liberal ideologies that can live within capitalism. It's over to you, Wendy.
Oh, sorry, I was writing notes.
Awesome.
So I just wanted to sort of set up a process that we've seen happen again and again. And so, as old as probably the Gilded Age, we have corporations who are trying to spend less money on taxes, right? Taxes that support our public services and our citizens. And so corporations often will donate money to a foundation. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is probably one of the easiest examples. And so they donate a lot of money, and when they donate that money, then that money is a tax deduction. So then the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization, tax-free organization, can then use that money to influence public policy. And often in influencing public policy, their influence of public policy comes back around to then benefiting the corporation. So it really is sort of a vicious cycle. But the nonprofit, something like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, will often donate money to other nonprofit special interest organizations. It is difficult sometimes to even track the amount of donations or where they go. Sometimes they're in the form of grants, and sometimes they're just in the form of donations. So we often see a nonprofit special interest organization. I'm going to just use a title of one for ease sake, but the Campaign for College Opportunity, for example. And what the Campaign for College Opportunity will do, and other special interest organizations, they will do research. And I put that in quotes because often the research, those of us who do research, will often say it's flawed, but not always, but there's research. And then the research is presented in a very slick sort of marketing brochure or report saying this is the problem. And often the message is that the public service is failing its citizens in some way. So somehow we're failing our students, is a message that the Campaign for College Opportunity has used quite a bit. And then lo and behold, the report has a simple answer. So if we only implement these policies, then everything will be right and perfect. Those policies go right to sponsored legislation. So the campaign or the special interest group sponsors legislation. The legislation is passed through by with the help of lobbyists, but also by political donations to our elected representatives. So it's sort of twofold. It's difficult for a representative then to not say, yes, I'll sponsor the legislation or I'll help pass it. But I also do think that many of those legislators truly believe that this, because they have this slick research report, they truly believe that this is the answer to making our community college function better for our students. And then, of course, those policy mandates, those are passed in the form of mandates, often unfunded mandates. They create more pressure on our already underfunded system. And then what happens is we fail, right? Those policy mandates don't necessarily increase transfer or increase graduation or increase whatever they're supposed to increase. And so we fail. And then we're going to have a repeat cycle, right? Out comes another report by another special interest group saying that this is how we're supposed to be, we're supposed to fix it. So the one last thing that I want to mention about this is these solutions are often oversimplified, and they're really applying corporate efficiency to human beings, right? So we're not corporations, we're humans. Our students are humans. They have real life events happen. They're not all the same. And you simply can't put a widget in one side and a widget comes out on the other side. So did I miss anything, Debbie, in our little setup here? I just want to make sure I covered it all.
No,
Okay.
I think that was so great. Thanks so much, Wendy.
Handing it back to you.
All right. So I thought I'd like to start by asking ourselves, mostly I believe we're faculty here, but even if we had some students in the house and administrators and staff, what we could ask ourselves, well, what are our core beliefs as faculty, and what is our analysis of the situation we find ourselves in? And I've gathered these through my research, but I also was able to bring versions of this presentation around the state to different student and faculty groups. And these really come from my conversations with these groups over the last 2 years. So we have, number one, we are in a battle with the academic industrial complex for the soul of public education. This one actually came from my conversation with the students of City College of San Francisco. And they were the ones to talk about the academic industrial complex and actually teach me this term. And so the definition is down below at the bottom of the slide, just to be super clear. It's a profit-driven relationship between public institutions, private companies, and philanthrocapitalist organizations. The AIC, not AOC, the AIC transforms students into customers, administrators into CEOs. You notice how now we call our college presidents CEOs. It's crazy. Campuses into markets and colleges into degree factories. Education is a human right. This was the foundation of our Educational Master Plan of 1960, which formed our public higher education system in California. Learning is a path to liberation, and education is freedom. These come from, some of us are familiar with Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which talks about education as liberation, and Bell Hooks's Teaching to Transgress, talking about education as the practice of freedom. The corporate agenda of privatization, anti-labor, austerity, and defunding the public good is shutting out students. That's our analysis of what's happening and our observation. The defunding of the largest and most diverse system of higher education in the nation is a form of systemic racism and classism. And building a campaign, which I hope we will do, and we're here to talk about, could reclaim and reinvent life-affirming education and combat austerity measures. So the threat to democracy, one way to think about it is this Diane Ravitch quote. And Diane Ravitch is someone some of you might be familiar with. She writes beautifully against the privatization of public education, and I rely heavily on her work. She said, an attack on public education is an attack on democracy. And so the other threats to democracy, which are here on this slide that I won't go through all of, are very much part of, I would say, the last decade in the world, but especially in this nation. So the first and the second, for example, democratic backsliding and disenfranchisement and structural inequality and longstanding systems of oppression. All of these threats, we as a community college system can and do actually deal with and address if we're able to do our jobs. And one way to think of the mission of community colleges generally is that we practice the work of democracy and we democratize opportunity. And if we are shrinking as we are 1 million students down, then we are not able to address these threats to democracy. And so I thought I would give a very brief historical context and from the master plan to the quote reform that we're in. So 1960 was when the master plan for higher education in California was formed, and it was the one that put into place the 3 tiers of public higher education. The belief of it was actually such a big deal in 1960 that it made the cover of Time magazine. It was nationwide news, the formation of our system. So very well celebrated nationally. The idea was that free, high quality higher education for all is a human right, and it was all free. My mentors at University of UC Santa Cruz benefited from this. They went to UCs for free. And if you're of a certain age, probably a lot of your faculty or mentors actually did get to go all the way through the UC for free. That's not the case now. And back then, though, even though this was such a great plan, the community college system still suffered from the lowest per student funding, but served and continues to serve the largest population with the highest need. So baked into the early days was this funding inequity. And then we had the 1970s with the onset of neoliberalism, and which is one way to characterize this moment of capitalism we're in. We'll talk about that a bit later. And also disinvesting from the public good, which is part of the neoliberal agenda. And then in 1978, we had Prop 13 restricting property tax increases, which has harmed public education ever since. And we've been trying to address this, and we almost were able to do that last elections and didn't quite get there, but hopefully we will be able to, reverse Prop 13 at some point. In the 1980s, we had Reaganism and deregulation and privatization and anti-unionism and the reform movement origin proper. So we're really talking about 50 years in the make, this period that we find ourselves in. It was a long game that folks were playing back then to get us to where we are now, where public education is being defunded and taken over by private entities. And so in 1988, we had Prop 98, which solidified the funding split, which we now, the California Community Colleges portion of the split is sadly inequitable. It's not enough. And that was part of Prop 98. But a bright light we did have in that same year was AB 1725 Vasconcelos, which has many things in that bill. One of them is the statewide academic senates 10+1 and the right to form local senates, and the student senates 9+1. And so even though we faculty are literally under threat of losing our power, which is actually codified in Ed Code and Title V, we still are empowered to have our senates, and that makes us actually a more powerful faculty than any of the 49 states of the United States. So our system of community colleges are actually, we have the ability to lead the way because of the empowerment of the faculty, and the unions are part of that in FACCC as well. And then skipping ahead to 2012 and 2016, we did have some millionaires' taxes, but that was not enough for funding our system. And now we find ourselves in the 2020s when we are doing our best with joint advocacy more and more. So FACCC is uniting with the unions and the statewide Senate and the student Senate. We have been over the years, but now I think the charge is even more, it's more intense. We have to do even more than we ever have done before. And so I thought I would just show the shrinkage that I'm talking about of the community colleges in numbers. So if you look on the left-hand side of the screen, I plotted the head count change from 2000 to 2022. And what you see here is in 2008, one of the peaks of headcount for our system was when we served around 2.9 million students. And that was the year of the credit crisis or the Great Recession. And sure enough, the philanthrocapitalist organizations swooped in and took advantage of that moment and started putting their policies in place just around that time. And by design, have slowly shrunk. Those policies have shrunk our system. Now we're down to serving an all-time record of 1.8 million students. So that's a loss of about 1 million students since 2008 by policy design. And so some folks argue, well, the California, maybe it's related to the population of adults or California's population. But if you see on the right-hand side, I just plotted the California population. And we've had a little dip lately because of COVID and other factors, but it's steadily increased since 2008, 6.4%. So that's not an excuse as to why we've lost so many students during that time. And then this is another way to show what our system is facing in terms of inequity and why we're struggling the way we are. And so what we've done here is we've shown our system, the CCC's funding per full-time equivalent student in comparison with K-12, the CSU, and UC. And so we're on the bottom there, and you can see our funding around 11,000 is quite a bit less than the other public education systems. So the question I ask for us to ponder here is, why are the California community colleges chronically underfunded, given the system's mission to serve the largest and most diverse student body in U.S. higher ed? And we're kind of here to answer that question. So the other part of the other way to describe our shrinkage is that our mission has really changed, and this has often happened under the radar, where the faculty groups and all the consultation groups haven't really been a part of the conversation. And sometimes we have, and many times we haven't. So the old mission, which is in education code, included the things on the orange square. So academic and strong workforce, remedial instruction, which is basic skills, ESL, non-credit, and community services and lifelong learning. With the Student Success Act of 2012, about 10 years ago, lifelong learning was eliminated. And now, just very recently, the language of remedial instruction has been eliminated, much to the surprise of even our own statewide Senate, who was not involved. And so the new language here on the blue side is instruction and additional learning supports to close the learning gaps. So that's our mission, shrinking before our very eyes. And we, as empowered faculty, have had very little say. Oh. And so back to some discussion of terminology, I just wanted to be super clear about all the terms we're using here. And one of them is reform. And I rely on Diane Ravitch's idea here, an argument that reform is actually a misnomer. She argues in this book and other places, the book is here, Slaying Goliath, reform groups have intentionally disrupted and derailed public education. So she prefers the term corporate disruptors, not reformers. And so she argues that the corporate disruptors have a playbook, and the playbook includes demonizing faculty, which we're all familiar with. I've added perpetuating a system that exploits part-time faculty, an aim to privatize public education, to lower taxes, to demolish education as a public good, and to disrupt for the sake of disrupting, giving us all busy work, one initiative after the other, where we're all busy doing stuff that has very little to do with our role of serving students. And then I wanted to point out that this is a national movement, not just here in California. And I thought this quote from Free City was really spot on. If you haven't read or heard of Free City, that's about the City College of San Francisco's struggles with the reform movement. And here's the quote is, "The national reform agenda pushed in all 50 states equates student success with the rapid completion of transfer degrees and certificates. The push for full-time attendance squeezes out students who cannot go full-time, students who are not necessarily headed toward the corporate workforce, and those who need and want education for other reasons, such as lifelong learners." This is the last term, I promise, but I wanted to say something about neoliberalism as well, just to be clear about how we're defining it. So this is a great article, Neoliberalism and the Academic Industrial Complex, that I learned about from students at City College. So corporatizing higher education is socially unjust and morally unethical. Neoliberalism plays a major role in corporatizing higher education. Neoliberalism is a form of global capitalism based on the deregulation of free markets and the privatization of wealth. The basic purpose is to allow private interests to own and control every aspect of the human, social, and natural world. Things like food, water, farmland, forests, healthcare, prisons, militaries, political processes, mass media, and of course, education are targets of neoliberal control. While most colleges are still nonprofit institutions, their primary function is to serve the neoliberal enterprise. So one way to characterize where we're at here in these last 2 decades is that we've been taken over by the reform movement. And here on the right, I've shown how our logo here, the community colleges, is sandwiched in between Lumina and Gates, which are the largest philanthrocapitalist funders of the reform. So we can see that this reform movement has been defunding and shrinking the California community colleges for decades now. The Chancellor's Office, our Board of Governors, over the whole system, the California legislators, they're heavily influenced by the reform agenda. And Wendy, in that great slide, kind of explained how and why the legislation is so influenced. So an example of this, just the latest, there are so many, is that our newest chancellor, Sonia Christian, is currently the vice chair of the Campaign for College Opportunities Board, and she's been serving on their boards since 2017. So the campaign is another philanthrocapitalist funded organization that has pretty much been responsible for most of our big policy shifts in the last 2 decades. And now our chancellor is directly involved with the campaign. So I thought I would say a few words about Lumina and Gates just to explain how the interests are compromised. So the Lumina Foundation for Education is actually not that old. It was founded in 2001, around the same era that the reform movement was taking its hold in the K-12 system first. They're the largest foundation focused on US higher ed. They were entirely funded by the Student Loan Marketing Corporation, or Sallie Mae, which still funds them. And they also funded our Student Success Task Force of 2012, which created for our system the first big policy, the first big bill package that shifted our mission, got rid of lifelong learning, et cetera. They've also funded ACCJC, which is our accrediting institution. So the Gates Foundation is the largest private foundation in the world. They are the chief architect of Common Core, K-12 standardized testing, and online modalities, creating demand for Microsoft products. And there's this thing out there in the literature called the Gates effect. And basically, it's this echo chamber of like-minded ideas among government and foundation worlds. So if, like when Wendy described, there's some glossy research that supposedly was done, and often it's not done very well. Often the data is very flawed. that gets circulated around and say the conclusion is, oh, the California community colleges are failing, then that's an echo chamber. Everybody starts coming up with solutions, which they believe their job is to do, because they believe they do solutions better, but to a problem that never existed, or certainly doesn't exist to the extent that they claim it does, or wouldn't be characterized the way that they are characterizing it. And so another way to describe this reformer ideology is austerity. So we see the shrinking of our mission from lifelong learning, basic skills, strong workforce, and transfer, once a 4-part mission, to a very narrow form of get in, get out transfer, catering to about 20% of our students. We see shrinking enrollment, and that's not just because of COVID or the more recent things. This has been happening, as you saw, over time. And part of that is that we're now prioritizing first-time, full-time students. And we are seeing a shrinking of educational and course options. The idea being that education is for developing human capital, workers in the workforce, not for students growing in knowledge, critical thinking, character, civic engagement, actually being able to take their time while they're in college. And so the way the reform works is that it's a network and it's broad. And I think Free City, the authors of that book, does a great job in their appendix describing this network. And I've just put here on this slide the various groups that are part of this vast network, partially explaining why the reform is so powerful. So aside from the funding, which we know comes from these rich organizations, these philanthrocapitalists. So the reform is all the way at the top in the federal government, at the U.S. Department of Education, the philanthrocapitalist foundations that fund so much of the work, think tanks, advocacy organizations, professional associations are influenced. ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, who's responsible for creating boilerplate language, reform bills, and then sending it out to the 50 states of the United States. Government officials are influenced. Jerry Brown was very influenced by the reform agenda, and Calbright was his baby, and he couldn't let go of it. And despite all even though his own legislature were against it, yet he won the day. And now Newsom, I believe, is still in favor of Calbright. That's just one example. And then this network and the reform goes across party lines. So Republican, Democrat, everything in between, and corporate media. And now I will turn it over to Wendy.
Okay, so there's a lot on this slide. And, I do have a linked version that I can send anybody if they want it. And I don't know if the PDF that we sent dropped in the chat, and I'll drop the PDF in the chat again if those links work, but we can definitely get you the linked version. But what I tried to do here on this slide is put together most of the policy reform in Sacramento over the last decade plus. Almost all of this policy reform comes from, special interest groups that are funded by corporations, and they all have many ideas in common. So I'm going to sort of give you the umbrella, and then I'm going to start to dive into some of what the individual pieces of legislation do. I could spend 2 hours on this slide, and we don't have time for 2 hours on this slide. So if anybody wants to have a bigger, longer conversation about any pieces of policy or legislation up here, let me know, and we can have virtual coffee and talk about it. But if we roll the clock back to about 2010, when this slide starts, we had Obama's summit on the community colleges in the White House. And there was a whole bunch of people from corporations there. And there was one community college faculty. I don't want to say there weren't any. There was one. It was Jill Biden. She was the only one that was there that actually taught in community colleges. And out of that report, and you can download it, you can Google Obama's Summit on Community Colleges, and you can start to read through it. And I'm just going to read through some of the ideas that came out of that summit. Degrees that lead to transfer, dual enrollment programs, statewide data systems that rely on evidence-based decision-making and accountability, including common course numbering, guided pathways, and common metrics that measure progress and outcomes. Technology to increase capacity and improve services, such as educational guidance and planning so that you don't need as many counselors. Promises that new technology will be purchased at economies of scale that will lift the costs of our districts to generate efficiency. And of course, common assessments and things like math and English. We also will have base funding. This is all out of the Obama Summit. Base funding based on completion rather than enrollment. Strengthen student supports. Flexible course delivery and credit, particularly for credit for prior learning. Partner with business and industry to improve and develop modern career education programs, including competency-based education. And then a few more: simplify financial aid and increase and improve financial aid, particularly for the non-traditional student. I don't really argue with that last bullet point, but again, often how it ends up manifesting is a concern. I'll just use one example on that last point. We always had college promise in the California community colleges. It was called the BOG fee waiver. And if you couldn't afford a class, you just walked in and signed a piece of paper saying you couldn't, and you got the class for free. And then we moved to the college promise, which repackaged the funds available for college, for free college, and put it into college promise. And you needed to be able to go to school for 12 units every semester, which is full-time. And then also you had to be straight out of high school. Now they have made some modifications to that a little bit, and more legislate with more cleanup language, but we still have that issue of focus on full-time students, which Debbie mentioned earlier, often leaves many of our students out of our system. So the overall arch of this is to focus our community colleges into the 2-year junior college model, right? Fund the students who can get through quickly, one and done as fast as possible. Start in high school. Who needs to take civics twice? We all got democracy, right? January 6th, what? So take civics once, because why should you take it twice? Don't reapproach a subject to get a deeper learning. Get through as fast as you can and become part of that corporate machine model. But that leaves out so many students that can't go full-time, or maybe are older adult students, or maybe need to support family members. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in a second. But all of this, almost all of the slides, all of the policies and pieces of legislation on this slide, for the most part, are narrowing our mission and trying to focus us on that 2-year junior college model. And if that doesn't work for you, we don't want to spend money on you. Did I miss anything, Debbie?
Oh, no, that was so great, Wendy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Turning it back to you.
All right. Awesome. So when I was doing the work of the presidency, when I was in the rooms, now that Wendy is in, working, trying to give testimony about on the different bills and be part of consultation and any kind of public event, the folks who were also in the room were from mostly these 9 organizations. And so I kept seeing these same organizations, and I did some homework about who they were, when they began, who are their board members, who's funding them. And so I just plotted them here in the order of their formation. And so the oldest by far is Public Advocates, but actually they just recently got into the higher education business, and they've been allies with SMAC and some of the other student organizations that I'll get to that have been weaponized by the Philanthrocapitalists. And then most of these organizations, I thought it was surprising to me, began around 2001, the same time that the Lumina Foundation began for higher ed and the reform movement began. So all of these organizations are funded by the Philanthrocapitalists. And so we have the campaign starting in 2001 and all of these organizations continuing. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that for now. And then the foundations, what I did is I went and I to the websites and I found out, and I asked around also a bit, what foundations funded those 9. And I found that the 9 had around 7 foundations in common. And these are philanthrocapitalist who have the big money to put towards these ideas. And I have on the title here, Decoding Their Missions, because it's so easy to look at these foundations and their missions, which sound really wonderful. And in fact, in some other arenas and industries, perhaps, I think some of these foundations do some good work, like fund the cure for malaria. But what the difference is these foundations don't tell the doctors how to do their work or the scientists how to do their work. But in our case with higher education, they want to tell us faculty and us colleges, the institutions, how to do our work. So it's they approach their role when it comes to influencing education very differently than something like the medical field. So that's just one example. So Lumina, Gates, James Irvine, and ECMC are the big 4. And then Hewlett, College. Oh, sorry, Wendy, please.
I was going to say, are you going to talk about what they actually do?
I wasn't.
Do you mind if I mention? So no. Lumina Foundation makes their money off student loans.
Yes.
So I think that's important to know. Right, Bill and Melinda Gates we know is technology, and James Irvine is mostly land, real estate, and then ECMC is student loan debt collection. So I just wanted to mention, if you reflect back on that slide where we're narrowing our mission to the junior college model, and we're trying to put everybody on the transfer pathway, you're directing everybody to student loans, right? So we have students that might take classes and not incur a lot of debt and actually be able to get a great job coming out of the community colleges. But if we focus every single one of them on that transfer pathway and move them all into the 4 years, most of our students are going to have to borrow some money. And if they can't pay it back, well, then ECMC wins, because then they get to go after them for debt collection. Somebody asked me privately in the chat, what does Bill and Melinda Gates get out of it? Well, Bill Gates at Microsoft, it's all tech. He's tech everywhere. And if you think about it for a moment,
how many Microsoft product gets sold.
Right. But it's so many tech solutions, right, that have come to our campuses to solve problems that people could solve if we invested in people. I just think of like Starfish is one of them that we've just, had in the last couple of years to connect with students. So if you start to look at these foundations and what they say their mission is, like lower student loan, debt rates, default rates. Well, no, you're doing debt collection. Like, let's be honest about it. And then you have to tie the money of why they're in the game. Yeah. And why Lumina's in the game is because the value of college has been declining. So they want to make sure that they have enough people taking out loans, because that's how they make their money. Sorry, Debbie, just had to get it.
No, thank you. I'm so glad. And please, anytime. As well as these, I wasn't going to say specifics about Hewlett, College Futures, and Kresge, but if you have any intel or insight on these.
No, not specifically. Okay. I gave you
those were the big 4 actually in common for all of those organizations. And then I wanted to point out that our foundation for the California Community Colleges is a grantee of these other foundations. So they fund us to do the reform work. And so the mission for our foundation is that it benefits and supports the mission of our community colleges, but now our mission has been taken over by this reform agenda.
And so I wanted to mention their budget has grown, and I almost fainted when I heard it last year. I was at the Board of Governors meeting and the foundation did the report, and their annual budget last year was $108 million for the foundation for the California community colleges.
Wow.
Where just about 6 years ago, it was 15 million. So what they did is they bought Microsoft for all of us, and now they're up to $108 million. If you think about your own district size, I'm at College of the Canyons, our district budget is about that. And we literally hire hundreds of people to do a lot of work and educate a ton of students. So you think, what are they doing with $108 million?
Yep. Thank you for that. I thought I would also offer some more examples of how the philanthrocapitalists have been involved. And one of them is that they co-created our vision, quote, vision for success that was came into practice, that was created during the last Chancellor Eloy Oakley. And here on the right of the slide, I have a screenshot of the acknowledgements page, the first page of the vision, and you'll note which philanthrocapitalist organizations are named. So we have the James Irvine Foundation, the Gates Foundation, and College Futures that supported the Vision Project. And then in that little yellow square, we have the co-author and project manager, Amy Supinger. And then I do a little deep dive on her. And she was employed as a consultant for Lumina during from 2012 to 2018. And it is at present a student success consultant for our foundation. And so that's Lumina's hands in our vision for success. And so basically the community college's vision for success was very much a project of these groups. And so Amy Supinger is just one example, but she's suspiciously hard to find online. I tried to look her up and find she doesn't even seem to have a website, but she's on Twitter, and she considers herself a higher education policy wonk, and her hands have been in almost every piece of reform kind of policy that our chancellor's office has supported. So she was this consultant for the student. She was the executive director of the Student Success Task Force of 2012. That's when I actually got active at the statewide level with the statewide academic senate, and I saw her guide, Jane, basically the leadership of the state, faculty leadership of the statewide senate had zero input into the task force because it was completely guided by Lumina. And it was really sad to see faculty have so little power at a high powered table where we were supposed to actually have some input. And then in 2017, this is when this person, Supinger, became the co-author and project manager of the Vision for Success. And one way to describe this reformer ideology, as in addition to austerity, which we talked about, is a get in, get out to cut costs, cloaked in the language of success and equity. So again, if faculty come out against some of these reform ideas, we sound like we're not interested in equity or student success, which couldn't be further from the truth. Of course, we're faculty. Why else would we be doing this job? I should say, I don't have to say much more about that. So one of the things that I did in my homework was I tried to figure out, well, how dominant is the non-practitioner perspective in these organizations that are creating our policy. And so of those 9 organizations, there were 100 board members. And of those 100 board members, 85% of them had zero experience in the California community colleges. They were not practitioners, not administrators, rarely students. And so basically 85% of those groups of decision makers are making decisions that are affecting our students and the future of our system, but have no experience in the system at all. And so this is a form of hegemony where we're made to believe that this way of thinking, the cutting the costs, get in and get out, is the right way to reform the system. Why not? If everybody wants to cut costs, isn't this a great idea? And I'm arguing in this presentation that our practitioner ideology of the public good is that we believe in investing in the public good. We believe in investing in public education. We want to increase the funding, not decrease. We want to increase our students' opportunities to take classes, not decrease. We want to make sure every student gets to explore their educational goal. So that's an opposing ideology. So I think we need a counter-hegemonic plan for reclaiming and reinventing the California community colleges like yesterday, so that this dominant ideology does not keep winning the day. So who gains from the shrinking of our system? Wendy has said this already so many times, but the student loan industry, the push for full-time attendance drives our students into debt. Education technology, the long game is to eliminate the need for faculty. And private and for-profit colleges and universities gain because our students will go there. And we know the for-profits cost up to 17 times as much as we do, and they're predatory on our students. They prey on our students. The anti-labor movement, this is definitely the long game, which is to eliminate unions. And any individual who does not believe in investing in the public good or in public education. And who loses from the shrinking of our system, the largest and most diverse student body in US higher education. Our students become empowered to transform their lives and participate in democracy when they are able to access low-cost, high-quality community college education, return to college to gain new skills, train for a new career, and explore their passion, learn and interact with their community in an educational environment, and explore their options as they embark on an educational path. All of the things that we know we do so well and used to do even better as a system are definitely under threat as our system's mission and our system continues to shrink year after year. And Wendy, it's to you.
So this is a slide that actually the Chancellor's Office used in a presentation to the Senate Budget Committee on finance education. I have sub 1, but I think it's sub 2. Anyway, we can change that. But this was just a couple weeks ago. And I think it's important. It's an important slide that sort of captures who our students are. So we have created policies that will benefit students who can go full-time to college, that they want to transfer, or at least their goal immediately is to transfer, not make money, that they can, they're often right out of high school, right? Because it's even part of the college promise that they get money if they're right out of high school. We have benefits for in the SCIF, we benefit math and English completers in the first year. So those who can go right into math and English, we have many students in their first year need to take a CTE class or some sort of skill-based class that will help them increase their income so that they can continue their education. But math and English learner transfer courses are monetized in the SCIF. The transfer alone is worth a lot more money to the colleges than CTE programs. But if we look at the overall makeup of our students, 74% of them are either part-time or non-credit. And if they're part-time, it's not going to be 2 years, I guarantee it, right? Even 12 units a semester, which is considered full-time, is not going to get you through in 2 years. And then, of course, non-credit students are not working towards those credits that they need to go to transfer. Adult learners, working learners, 64% of our students are working learners, and many of them have patched together a full-time job, so it's not just one job. First generation students and students of color. So we are the least funded system of higher education in California, even less than the K-12, yet we're the most diverse system. And the students who are struggling the most in terms of trying to work their way through. So we wonder why we're losing enrollment. I had a couple of people in the chat say, well, how does this affect enrollment? Well, Debbie had already showed you that slide of how it's affecting enrollment, but what our students need and who our students are is there's a mismatch with these policies. We have another couple slides that'll show you the mismatch. Do you want me to talk about this one, Debbie?
Yeah, please.
So this one is from a statewide college attendance survey that the Chancellor's Office put together, and then they asked the districts to send out. So it's a large survey of almost all the districts and students who were either taking classes or considering taking classes at the community colleges. And so if you look at prospective students who are thinking about taking classes, 32% said they can't afford college at this time. And then another 29% say they have to think about prioritizing work over school. And then, of course, another 25% or 29% thinking about, where they're going to go to school. Maybe it's not the community colleges. But then if we look at those who are previously enrolled, again, it's work, can't afford college at this time, and I have dependents I need to care for. maybe there's not enough online classes, but if you go down to I need more in-person classes, right? So there's this diverse group of students who need both, and we're trying to satisfy both. And then sandwiched in between those two crazy ideas of like needing more online, needing more in person is I need to prioritize my mental health. I think it's well put right there. And then one more slide. These are students who dropped out of class. They dropped their classes because they had to prioritize work, 33%. They had to prioritize their mental health, 30%. And they couldn't keep up with the pace of the class, 29%, which I think speaks to so many things, not just, having to juggle work and dependence and mental health also gets students behind in their classes. But we also have students who are being directly placed into maybe classes that they're not ready for, right? Through AB 1705. So these are who our students are. And I wonder how any of the policies that were on that big slide, how any of those policies have helped any of these students. Because these are the reasons they're telling us we're dropping classes, or these are the reasons why we can't continue, right? From our students' mouths, these are the problems. And yet none of those policies are addressing any of this. Go ahead, Debbie.
Oh.
There you go.
Yeah. So one of many, probably one of the more important ways that we can start talking with each other and making a difference is by uniting. And there's no question that we are stronger together if we join forces. We've still got 1.8 million students. We've got around 53,000 faculty, 28,000 classified professionals, and 2,200 administrators. So we're big in number. If we unite and create a strategy, organize, and a campaign, I think there's a lot of potential there, and I hope we do. And we can also think about what other next steps we need to, what are our next steps? And I hope we have this conversation here today and afterwards, but researching, organizing, strategizing, building a campaign. And then we came up with a few questions that we can talk about now or later. We did this presentation at the ANP, and we had a really robust dialogue with our students who were there. About half of the attendees were students and the faculty. But these are questions we can ask ourselves. How do we frame our story? What counter narrative will win against the reformer narrative of austerity? What would equity look like if we decoupled it from the drive to cut per student costs? What are some strategies to build back the California community colleges? How do we influence the state budget and legislation? What else? And the last slide is just, you can see kind of a bunch of references, and I won't go through all of them, but I do want to say most of them are books. The one is the article that I wrote for FACCC, that's a live link. But these books have all come out within the last couple of years, most of them, 2021, 22, 23. A couple of them are slightly older, but what this tells me is that the thing that we're talking about here is actually being well discussed in all of these other places. So building a movement and making alliances across, the nation, I think is a timely endeavor and worthwhile. And this is the time. So I'm hopeful about that. And please do check out all of those references as well. And I will stop myself there.